welcome to WION Business Masters, the show where we bring you in-depth conversations with business leaders who have catapulted India onto the world stage. These pioneers are reshaping industries with their innovative ideas and dynamic leadership. And today we're honored to have with us Mr. Nalinikanth Gollagunta, CEO, Mahindra and Mahindra's automotive division, with a vast background spanning global markets, including his time as the global CEO of Enterprise Digital at GE Healthcare. Mr. Gollagunta is among the leaders who bring an external perspective to Mahindra, known for grooming leaders from within. An electrical engineer from IIT Madras, Mr. Gollagunta has worked across geographies as well as varied organizations. His approach has been described as an outside-in approach. His expertise and fresh outlook have made him an exciting force in the ever-evolving automotive sector. Welcome to WION Business Masters, Mr. Gollagunta, also affectionately known as Nal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, of course, let's dive right in. Absolutely. You know, you have had an incredible career shift from healthcare to automotive. What's perhaps the biggest surprise that you encountered moving from one industry to the other?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, automotive as an industry is seen as one of the old economy industries to that extent. So when I walked in, you don't expect the kind of transformation it is going through technologically, for example. The vehicles which are put out even 5 years ago to the vehicles we put out today across the industry, unrecognizable, the amount of software which goes in, the tech which goes in. So that's the pace of change was quite surprising coming into an industry like auto. I think the second thing is the kind of contribution it does to the economy, the kind of jobs, scale of jobs it generates, the revenues it generates for the government, the interest government has in a vertical like that. That's been a huge learning for me as well.
All right, now you've worked across multiple regions, America, Asia, Pacific, Middle East. Now, how do you adapt your leadership style when you're managing diverse teams? Now, this is perhaps an opportunity for you to explore cultural nuances as well. How do you do that?
Yeah, so it's been a process of learning, and I'm still learning. Every time I go to a new country for the first time, it's completely new learning for me to that extent. There are a few things which you need to keep in mind. I think the first one is, at the end of the day, each of them that we work with in the team, they're all human beings, and you want to treat them with the same amount of respect and dignity. That's the first place you start, right? And the second thing is assume that their cultural nuances, their behaviors, at some level, is rooted in some context which I may not be aware of to that extent. And having the humility to say that, listen, I don't understand it. Let me suspend judgment at least and understand what it looks like, right? That's a critical piece to that extent. And third is, in all the teams, you should be looking to make them successful as your team members. And if you're able to do that, I think generally, over a period of time, you get to work very closely with these guys in a very productive way.
Right, that's very interesting. Now, Nal, given that you were an external hire at Mahindra and Mahindra, as I mentioned earlier as well, how did you adapt your leadership approach within the organization, as I mentioned, which is known for grooming its talent from within?
Yeah. So, by the way, it's a very important thing to groom talent from within. There should be very compelling reasons why you want to go outside. Right. So, it's the right thing to do for Mahindra to that extent. Second thing, walking in, I knew it's a deeply entrenched culture, huge heritage, and a very proud heritage at some level, right? And it's a well-performing organization. So the way I would draw an analogy is it's like a space shuttle re-entering back into the into the atmosphere. The approach angle at which you come in, if you come in too fast, you're going to burn out.
Right.
And if you come in too shallow into the atmosphere, you're going to bounce off the atmosphere, right? Any kind of transition is like that. If you try to do too many changes right up front, you're likely to have an organ rejection, or the organization is not going to be able to cope with the change. But if you do too shallow, then you're not going to have much of an impact on the organization. So you'll have to figure out what the nuances are, figure out what are the areas where you can start to do some initial work, but not necessarily try to completely rewire the organization, especially for such a storied organization like Mahindra.
Right, so you say that that was the right choice for them to reach out. Now, also, when you look back at your early career, what decisions or choices do you feel were instrumental in getting you to where you are today? Can you pinpoint any particular moment in your career that set you on this path?
Yeah, listen, it's a series of happy accidents, if I may put it that way.
Right.
I think if there was one pivotal moment, it's probably a couple of years out of my McKinsey. I joined Cisco at that point in time. head of strategy at the business, then basically saying, listen, I want to get into an operational role and I will run sales, right? And for somebody who's done strategy for a long time, you're in a CXO position, running sales is not necessarily something you would naturally want to do. And it's highly operational, highly in the weeds, if I may put it that way, or in the field to that extent. That's a big switch. But if you ask me, that is one of the biggest drivers for what has happened since then in my career over the last 10 years.
Right, and in fact, talking about your career before this as well, you often emphasize the power of digital transformation during your time at GE Healthcare. How do you see this concept evolving within the automotive industry?
Yeah, no, so listen, digital as a transformative power is huge for us in automotive. In fact, we use the phrase software-defined vehicles now, often. And I'll give you an example. If today you were to take your vehicle to a workshop for servicing the vehicle, we are soon reaching a point where a bulk of the work we can do over the air. And we already have that in most of our vehicles today, where software can be updated over the air. And you really need to bring the vehicle only when you have to do mechanical changes to the vehicle to that extent, right? And there's just one example of how transformation can be driven through digital means.
All right, and as a leader who's overseeing such a massive P&L, how do you balance short-term profitability and long-term innovation at Mahindra?
Yeah, so it's an ongoing battle, honestly. I think the best way to do this is have very clear-cut expectations with your team members and say that obviously we're all pushing for the month's numbers, the quarter numbers at the end of the day. But there are a few cardinal rules you don't want to violate. It's about safety of your employees. It's about the quality of the product you put out there. It's about the customer commitments you have. And ultimately, it's about the Mahindra brand. You don't want to ever put that at risk. Within those guardrails, we are going to be push the system to get to the numbers you need to get to on a monthly or a quarterly basis. But you never sacrifice your long-term roadmap or objectives just to get an additional 1 or 2%. You should know where to push and where to pull back and say that, listen, here I'm better off kind of focusing on the long term and driving that.
Now, Nal, I was reading this piece that you'd written, Healthcare for All, Accelerating to a Healthy Future. This is a piece that you wrote back in 2018. You talk about equitable access and quality of services and how tech can play a major role in bridging that gap. This was, of course, in 2018. In the years since, a lot has changed. The world has endured a pandemic. If you were to write that piece today, what would you change about it, or do you think it still holds?
Yeah, see, the broader tenets of the article still holds very much. But I think we have had some huge learnings through COVID as well. Couple of them. One is the role of the caregiver, the role of the healthcare professional at the center of everything we do. We normally kind of discount that, right? And through burnout, I mean, most of the healthcare professionals went through severe burnout through COVID. And a lot of them quit the industry to a level where we have shortage of healthcare professionals today because they just don't want to go through the same kind of stress, right? So I would bring empathy back. I would bring back the caregiver at the center of everything we do and think about what do we do to make their lives better as much as we want to make the lives of the patient better as well.
Right. And just want to reflect on your experience across varied sectors. Is there a particular industry trend or innovation that you believe will revolutionize business in perhaps the next decade?
Yeah, so listen, it's going to sound cliched, to be honest, but digital has always been something I've been a huge proponent of over the last almost 10 years now.
Right.
But even within digital, AI was something which kind of came up in the last few years. And when generative AI came out about a year ago, I was actually quite skeptical about it, right? These things take time. But genuinely, what I've seen, what Gen AI can do has been hugely inspirational for me. So I think if there's something which is going to fundamentally change how we're going to be running our businesses over the next decade and 2 decades, it's Gen AI. And it's not just in the industry, it's how children learn, how they go to school, and what do they do in school is also fundamentally getting transformed with Gen AI. So that would be one trend we should look out for.
And Al, just to expand on that, how important is collaboration across industries like tech and auto, and how do you foster that kind of interdisciplinary innovation at Mahindra?
Yeah, listen, it's a great question because a lot of what we try to do in AI, Gen AI, or even digital at some level is about tapping into the ecosystem. The ecosystem which has your Googles of the world, the Metas of the world, the Reliance Jios of the world, all those companies to that extent, right? So I always tell the team that don't think that we need to have all the skills and capabilities within the organization. As long as you have access to it and it's part of an ecosystem you can tap into, you're perfectly fine. That's one piece to it. But the second piece is role rotations. Getting people to do more tech roles would be quite helpful as well.
All right, and finally, what's your next big goal at Mahindra? What keeps you motivated?
Yeah, listen, what keeps us all motivated is the appeal of the product which goes out there. We still have a long way to go. We want to get to a point where somebody buys a Mahindra with a badge of honor and says that I didn't even think of a different brand. So that's the true north we have as a goal. All
right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, your approach, it's been described as an outside-in approach. Now, I'm curious to know how that came about and what outside-in leadership really means to you.
Yeah. So, outside in for me is about putting the customer at the center of everything we do. Putting what the customer needs, what are the problems she is solving for, and therefore start to build around that to that extent. It's an approach which I've honed at my time in Cisco. It comes from being in the tech industry for quite some time. And so that's really what it is about, putting the customer at the center of everything and then kind of building the solutioning around that.
All right, and let me just quote here. Mahatma Gandhi once said that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service of others. Now, how do you embed a sense of purpose in your leadership style?
Yeah, so I think the modern management jargon around is servant leadership, which amazingly enough is exactly what Gandhi has said. So it's about making your team successful.
Right.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes and saying that what would I do in their shoes, and then helping them be more successful in their careers. As long as you're able to do that, that gets the best out of them.
All right, and what's perhaps the most surprising sources of inspiration you've drawn from that's impacted your work?
Field visits, going, and we have a very strong commercial vehicle business, going to the mandis all across the country at 5 a.m. in the morning, 6 a.m. in the morning, talking to customers who have driven for 7-8 hours, and learning what they're doing for their livelihoods, but truly building the nation.
So you draw a lot of inspiration from that. Now, just to touch on what you said earlier as well, how you were a little skeptical when generative AI came about. Now, Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So my question to you is, that being said, how do you balance what customers think they want with innovation they perhaps haven't imagined yet?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you go and ask them what is that you want in an automotive car, they are going to be constrained with what they've experienced, and that's what they're going to give out to that extent. But if you look at their fundamental needs and what they're solving for in their day-to-day lives, I think that's a different question. That's a timeless concept. You're trying to solve for their problems and try to understand what they are solving for, and then you work towards that.
All right, and electric vehicles are the future. Mahindra is investing heavily in that space. What excites you most about leading this transition?
Yeah, see, listen, the beauty is EV vehicles give us a fundamentally new platform to reimagine what an automobile would be. And so an ability to go back to the drawing board on a clean sheet of paper and saying that if with an EV, what could I do, which would fundamentally change that. And that's what we're working towards. And the vehicles we're putting out in 2 quarters are BEV vehicles, which are out there. So that's exactly what they are, an embodiment of that promise.
All right. And with AI and robotics advancing rapidly, how do these technologies integrate into Mahindra's future innovations? Now, in an interview from May this year, in fact, you spoke about how the emphasis is on democratizing technology. I want to understand, what does that really mean and what would that entail?
Yeah, so a lot of the technology which is coming in the automotive industry traditionally has come at the absolute top end of the vehicles, right? A vehicle which is a crore plus, 90 lakhs, 80 lakhs. We took an approach 4 years ago to say that we want to take these inaccessible technologies and bring it to the masses at an affordable price point. And the 700 was a start of that process where we put out ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems to that extent, right? And so that is something we're now taking across our entire product portfolio. 3XO was one, now with the Thar Rocks, we have brought that in as well. And that's democratizing technology. Bring out technology which is inaccessible and bring it to a price point where mass adoption can happen.
All right, that's very interesting. Now, if you had to mentor a young CEO entering the automotive industry, what's the first lesson that you would teach them?
Yeah, listen, it goes back to the outside-in leadership we talked about. spend the first 2 months out in the field. Try not to be in the office as much as you can be. Spend time in customer livelihoods. Drive with them in their vehicles. Understand the challenge they go through. You come back with a much better perspective on what you should be solving as a product problem.
All right. And when you think about the future of India's automotive industry, what role do you see Mahindra or the automotive industry at large playing in shaping that future?
Yeah, so a few things come to my mind. First is climate change is real, and we are a huge contributor towards emissions at this point in time as an overall industry, because we fundamentally are in the mobility industry to that extent. That puts a lot of responsibility on us, and therefore bringing in the EV revolution at the right time, at the right scale, is a critical responsibility we have in solving that climate change problem. And second thing I talked about in the beginning, we are a huge employment generator for the country as well. So making sure that all of us are stewards of that ecosystem and making the entire ecosystem being successful is critical.
Right, and you know, I want to also talk about the evolving jobs landscape. You've led in high pressure roles for years. How do you personally stay sharp and refreshed amidst all the demands of your job? Because there is growing discourse around a healthy work environment, flexible hours, and Gen Z and millennials are leading the charge when it comes to calling out toxic practices that have persisted. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so listen, it's a dialogue between the employee and the company at some level. All of us have different needs and different priorities at different parts in time. Recognizing what those priorities are and making sure we work around that. And for me, for example, spending a couple of hours every day with my children is critical. And I work my life around that. It doesn't mean I don't work long hours, but I figure out what the 2-3 hour period is when I'm absolutely 100% spending with them. So it's a figuring out what you care about and then making sure that you can work around that.
All right, so you said dialogue is key in that
Absolutely.
aspect. Now, I'm sure many people look up to you as a thought leader. Some individuals or leaders that have inspired you along your journey?
Quite a few of them. Anand Mahindra would be one of them, for his humility and for his ability to put the country at the center of everything he does to that extent. I've also had the privilege to work for Mr. Premji, Azim Premji of Wipro, for 3 years. A hugely inspiring figure as well, and putting charity at the center of everything he does. So yeah, some of these are examples.
All right, so we've talked business. Let's now switch gears. What's one hobby or interest that surprises people when they hear about it?
Younger days, I used to go skydiving a lot, jumping out of planes. Of course, we have moderated now. I do more trekking and mountaineering, more of that, and bird watching to the extent. But yeah, skydiving.
Bird watching as well. That's very interesting. Now, you've traveled and lived in many different places around the globe. Do you have a favorite destination that you return to for inspiration, relaxation? Yeah,
absolutely. So outside India, the place where I spent most of my time, formative career years, was California. It's a place I'd love to go back to at any point in time. The national parks are fantastic there. Like I said, I love to go hiking, so it's a good place for me to go back and recharge.
All right, and if you weren't a business leader, what would you be doing right now? Any childhood dreams that you feel like you've had to leave behind because of the corporate world?
Honestly, not really. Quite happy with where I am and what I'm going to do. Yeah, if I had some little bit more time, I'll do more mountaineering and hiking to that extent. But I'm hoping I'll get some time as the leadership under me takes over.
All right, so that's only recreationally that you would like
Absolutely.
to do that. But how did you decide that this is something that you really, truly were passionate about and this is what you wanted to do?
You're talking about the mountaineering and hiking?
No, I'm talking about the job and the role that you hold today.
Yeah. So, listen, I think the industry is an important criteria and metric. I typically look for industries which are in the middle of a transformation and change, because that gives an ability for the leader to come add value and drive change to that extent and be part of that. So if you've seen my career, I've generally jumped into industries when they're right at that pivot point of having huge transformational change happening. Healthcare was that in 2017. And then I had that journey for 6-7 years and drove digital there. Auto is exactly in the same place. It's in the middle of a fundamental transformation change.
All right. And what's one piece of technology or gadget that you cannot live without?
It's the iPad. I use the iPad. You'll see me carrying it everywhere. I'm writing notes on that. So that's a piece which I never leave behind any time.
All right. Now, in today's rapidly evolving world, what skills and qualities do you think are critical for the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, so I think with the pace of change that we're seeing today, your ability to not only learn, but also to unlearn. Because if you need to work in different environment, different work contexts, you have to give up on certain habits and relearn new things, right? So I'd say that if there's a single most important ability, it's not just learning, it's about unlearning and then relearning a new skill. That to me is the most important piece of advice I would give.
And in your time in the industry, how have you seen the workforce evolve or change? How do you think it's different now from when you perhaps started out?
Yeah, so I think there's a bit more balance. When I started out, we put our jobs and careers absolutely at the center of everything we did. And a lot of times at the cost of other things as well. There's increasingly a dialogue where it says that it's an equally important element to talk about life, balance with life and family as well. So that's a fundamental change.
All right, and finally, for anyone aspiring to step into your shoes one day, what's a skill that people don't necessarily associate with the field or the industry that you have found to be invaluable in your journey?
Yeah, so, and I hate to bring it back again, but digital literacy at the core level, trying to understand where the fundamental technology changes are happening, is going to be critical. The future is all about software. It's about software on wheels, not the mechanicals of it. In fact, with EV, the mechanicals are going to go much easier to that extent. And your ability to figure out what the next technological trend is going to be very critical to lead the automotive industry.
All right. And what would you say, when we talk about balance, what is one thing that you think the new workforce should really prioritize when they're entering the industry?
Really, if you're coming into an industry at the initial parts, your core goal should be about learning different parts of the business more than anything else, right? The demands of your time outside work are a little bit less than when you're 10 years into your career, when you have a family and other things to that extent. So I'd focus on learning as much parts of the business as you can without burning yourself out. But that's what I would put the most emphasis on.
All right, and what would you say is the most challenging part about being a leader? You have various types of people to contend with. What do you think is the most challenging part of it?
It is decision-making under ambiguity.
All right.
Decision-making with partial information.
And when it comes to the workplace, how do you deal with difference in opinions and even if there is any acrimony, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so in a lot of different things, acrimony comes when people are not listening to each other. And having an ability to sit people down and have a conversation, understand their point of view, actually listen to them and understand that you're trying to solve for the individual as much as you're trying to solve for the problem. And generally, you're able to find middle ground between the two parties.
And I'm sure you've also had to take some tough calls. What's your process then?
Calls have to be taken up in business, in service of business to that extent. But making sure we do it in a way that we're treating the human being at the end of it with dignity and humility, and that's a critical piece.
All right. And apart from outside in, if you had to describe your leadership in one word, what would you say?
2 words, if I may.
Yes.
It's servant leadership. It's about making your team successful.
All right, thank you so much, Nal, for joining us on WION's Business Masters today and giving us such a deep dive into your leadership journey and your insights. And to our viewers, we hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as we did. Stay tuned for more insightful conversations and episodes. My name is Hemkaur Saroya and this is WION Business Masters. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time with another trailblazing leader and their journey.
I actually employ a lot of youngsters in my team. So I love to work with freshers, and given the fact they will listen, they will understand, they will go back to my solutions, they will come back with solutions, and they will make it happen. So whatever they make it happen may not be necessarily your satisfaction. At the end of the day, it will come closer to your what you are expecting. That's something I see youngsters are bringing on the table as one of the strengths. Not because they have bookish knowledge is good, but they also have the knowledge that actually impacts the world today.